All right, we're live. And excuse me today because I got the baby with me. Say hi, Millie. I got her today for this live. I actually have had her for the past couple weeks because I'm currently in between jobs. And as long as I'm not working, we aren't putting her in daycare. We have the other two in daycare. But keeping her out of daycare until then. But anyways, you viewer probably don't care about any of that because odds are, especially if you're watching this on YouTube, you are new because we are just starting on YouTube. But if you are a Christian who is interested in nerdy things, who is interested in being informed, who is interested in being and having critical thought and being discerning, this video is for you, especially if you want to know how the church can grow and advance and lead in the 21st century, how the local church can lead in communities and can serve as a city on a hill, as Jesus told us to. So today, in today's video, you get me and talkative Millie. But no, in today's video, we're going to watch a couple of videos. First, a video from a guy by the name of Beryl Solomon, who is Jewish, explaining how the video is called The Jewish Economy Explained. And in this video, he explains how Jewish communities... I just realized we didn't go live yet on Instagram. Let's get live on there. All right. In this video, Beryl Solomon, Mr. Solomon, explains why Jewish communities oftentimes end up wealthier than secular or even Christian counterparts. And the reason is embedded in a kind of communal financing, communal reliance. And the church, if it actually reflects... Man, Millie's really noisy right now. But it actually reflects a lot of what we see in Acts 2 and 4, and we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, and in the early church about practiced by the early church in terms of communal finance, communal provision. And if the church can recapture that today, we can lead in the midst of a lot of significant economic challenges. But if we cannot figure that out, and if we continue to act as less as communal environments of reciprocal generosity and participation in a two-way kind of financial relationship, and continue in sort of a contribution mindset that's extractionary in one direction, then I think the church is going to fall behind. And so I want to talk about that a bit today and share what we can learn from our Jewish brothers and sisters on this topic. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Thank you to everyone who's joined today. I'm going to pull this video up and mute myself so you don't hear 6-month-old shrieks. All right, let's just get the proper window capture up. Here we are. Okay, and let's dive into it.
We'll be discussing the Jewish circular economy. A lot of people have said that Jewish people are good at business. Now, instead of me calling this anti-Semitism, I'm going to double down and say, heck yeah, we're good at business. Let me teach you some of the secrets that we've accumulated over the past 3,000 years. This being one of the biggest and baddest secrets that we have. You're going to want to stay until the very end of this video because that's when it's going to...
Wait a minute. Someone just commented no sound, but I'm picking up sound on my system. Are you guys getting sound right now? Can you let me know?
Now, instead of me calling it all start to make sense, and you're going to be able to apply this not only to yourself, but your community and everybody around you. My name is Beryl Solomon. If this is your first time on my page, please hit the subscribe button. Please leave me a like. Please leave me a comment so that we could be connected more often. Let's jump in. The Jewish circular economy. Let me explain to you how this works. So there's a few core businesses that Jewish people are involved in. Let me first explain to you what type of businesses we go into. So one is, it's a business that has to make a lot of money. To be Jewish, it's expensive. I myself, thank God, have 5 kids, and hopefully I'll have more than 5 more. It's expensive to be a Jew, and we need to make a lot of money. So that's number one. Whatever business we go into has to be lucrative. Number two, it has to be moral. It is very rare, if ever, actually I can almost guarantee this, you will never find an Orthodox Jewish man in the strip club business. Yes, it makes a lot of money, but it is not a moral business. Let's talk about some businesses that do make a lot of money and are moral. So let's just talk about like real estate, for example, okay? Let's call real estate one of the core businesses. So here's the circular economy explained. So a Jewish man gets a real estate deal.
You know what nobody talks about when it comes to building a content creator business? That if you're not using a tool like Honeybook to stay,
let's call it 200 units in the Bronx, okay, somewhere, right? And he buys the deal. First of all, the deal most likely is probably coming from a Jewish broker or one of his other Jewish friends in the real estate business. So once he secures that deal, he needs to go finance that deal. So who's the first logical person for him to pick up the phone to?
I want to point out that first and foremost, he's talking about deal origination and stuff. It's within the Jewish community. This is something that I think Christians, like, we have our church lives and then our work lives entirely like separate, and I just don't understand why. Like, why aren't we prioritizing supporting the businesses of those people who attend our church? Why aren't we prioritizing making job availability known in our churches and stuff, especially if we believe that we have the same kind of Millie, you're talkative. She's gotten real talkative recently. Especially if we have the same kind of core motivations. I would think that we should be emphasizing like communal participation in the workplace, just in support of each other, you know?
Jewish friend that is in logical person for him to pick up the phone to, a Jewish friend that is in finance, right? There's Jewish people that own banks, there's Jewish mortgage brokers, there's Jewish lenders out there. He's going to pick up the phone and he's going to call his buddy that he sees in synagogue every day because his buddy knows that he's a good guy, he trusts him, and he knows that if spit hits the fan, he knows exactly where he sits, exactly where his house is, exactly who to talk to make sure he could get through to him. So Jewish businessman is going to buy the piece of real estate. He's going to want to finance it with one of his Jewish buddies. And now he's going to have to service that piece of real estate, right? There's snow removal. There's cleaning supplies. There's construction that's going to need to be done. All of those, he's going to try to hire Jewish people and Jewish companies in order to try to fulfill this. And I'm going to explain to you all why. It's going to make sense to you, like I said, by the end, but you got to stick to the end.
This should make sense for the church too. There's no reason why that shouldn't be exactly the same for the Christian local church.
So now he's hired his buddies to do the construction, like I said, to do the remodeling, to do the construction supplies. Whatever it is, he's going to try to hire Jewish. And now those companies, so for example, like as I mentioned, the construction company, right? That construction company also needs services. The construction company needs accounting, it needs advertising, it needs office space, it needs all types of ancillary services. So even supporting the direct services to the real estate, the supporting service, right? The construction company, we're just using one of them for example, he's going to try to hire Jewish people to do his indirect services. He's going to hire a Jewish business accountant. He's going to try to hire a Jewish lawyer. He's going to try to rent his office space from his buddy Shlomo, who owns the office building right next to his synagogue. You see what I mean? He's going to try to give that business to those people. And by the way, all the while, all of these people all along the way, guess what they're all doing? Circular economy. They're taking tithes, they're taking at least 10% of their earnings, of their profits, and they're pushing it down to charity. So that means, and by the way, their own charities, their own synagogues, their own schools, their own food banks, their own disability centers. Why? Because they want to create this circular economy. Now let me tell you why. You might be watching it this far, and you might say to yourself, how is it fair? Why is it okay that they can do this, that we can do this?
And let's ask, is the Protestant Christian economy similarly circular? If not, why? Why not? It's what we see in the Bible and what we see in the early church. Why is it not today? I think there's some reasons that have a lot to do with forgetting this kind of thing, as Christianity just became the norm where everyone was Christian. So there's no like core enclave of Christians because, well, everyone in society in the West was Christian. And I think it also has to do with the independent, individualized kind of individual person-centric society that we have created in the U.S. and in much of the West. And that's just, there are lessons that we can learn here for sure.
First of all, not only is it okay, but you're going to understand why and how you could apply this to yourself and your community going forward. So let me give you some reasons why a circular economy is good for you. So number one is, this is probably the biggest one, trust. Everybody in this circle, okay? If he has a problem with, let's say, let's say the real estate guy has a problem with the company that's supplying to him his supplies, his cleaning supplies for his building. And he has a dispute, right? So he ordered $10,000 worth of garbage bags. The garbage bags turned up faulty. Now they have a problem. So he knows, the real estate operator knows that if he has a problem with any of the people that he's doing business with, because they are Jewish, they have common friends, they have common rabbis, they have common associates, and they will be embarrassed to screw each other. They won't mess each other up because they go to synagogue with each other. They go to school, their kids go to school with each other, right? So they're going to be very careful in order to treat each other with respect and dignity. So trust is the number one thing. Here's another thing. They think the same. Okay?
Hi, I'm JT, and I made Result Hunter, the search engine for...
A lot of times, I'll get on the phone with people from different cultures. I remember when I was the vice president of my college, and I remember people think different. We had somebody who represented the LGBT community. We had somebody who represented the African American community. We had somebody who represented the Chinese community in the school. We had the evangelical community. All of us came to the table. We were trying to make policies, and I remember we all thought very different. We all had different priorities. So they're creating this circular economy. Why? Because they think the same. And then number three is, because they're a big family. We are a big family.
I just want to point out on that note of people thinking the same. A lot of what he brought up were different ethnic minorities or ethnic groups and stuff. But he did bring up evangelicals, and I want to point out it's really neat and critical to remember that Christianity, any Christian subset, is not white Protestant or black Protestant or even Messianic Christian Jews, but that all of them are united in that central identity in Christ, and thus similarly we should be able to share that kind of thinking the same characteristic, even if regardless of our ethnic or racial background or cultural background for that matter outside of our faith.
Right? So it makes sense that you should want to see the people around you succeed. It makes sense that you should want to give the business to your brother, to your neighbor, to your cousin, to your uncle. Why? Because we are taught in Judaism, and I see a lot of communities, they don't understand this, and they have to get better at this. We want to see each other succeed. We want to see each other grow because we understand. Check this out, and it's all going to start to make sense, right? I told you to watch to the end. We understand that if we're all doing well, the excess flow of all this money gets pushed down back into the community charities. So when my neighbor, my Jewish neighbor does well, and he's making a lot of money, and he now is going to donate that money to my kid's school, right? Let's say that's one of his charities, right? He's going to donate that money to my kid's school. That's good for me. My kid's going to have new whiteboards, new blackboards. He's going to have new equipment, new gyms, new whatever it is. So I want to push money, and I want to push business towards people in my economy, in my community. Why? Because my community directly benefits. And when my community is doing good, I benefit from that doing good. So this is not unique, by the way, to the Jewish community. I don't care what sect you're from. I don't care what religion, what race. Everybody could establish this circular community. I hope this brought you value. If it did, if you made it to this point, you're awesome. I love you. Smash that subscribe button. Leave a like.
All right, so that's that bit about this circular economy. And now I want to jump into this video, why Americans have no economic future. This talks particularly about this crisis for, this is where the video title is here is the church is whiffing it on this. And the big spot, I think, is that we have this crisis where this boomer and even Gen X generation to some extent they lived to some extent in that way of mutual provision, in that way of opportunity for all. Somewhere that got lost, and young people now across American society and even in the church are expected to, church giving is talked about in this way, church participation is talked about in this way. It's a spectator sport with a contributor kind of atmosphere, right? So you attend and participate and you contribute to the nonprofit, which is the church. But it's not this circular economy. It's a you go, you watch, you give so that you can continue to watch and go. And it's not this kind of whole of life thing. Now, the average church in the US is something like 80 attendees. So I wouldn't say even that this is the majority case in terms of number of churches, but the average Christian does not attend one of those smaller average churches due to the way that laws of averages work. They skew to the larger side, right? So the average Christian attends much larger churches, okay? And so the average Christian in the US right now attends churches oftentimes where it is much more of a spectator sport with a one-way contributor kind of model, and in which there is no sense of reciprocity, no sense of circular economy. And what I want to nail in this is we're going to talk about this thing happening in our society, and I want to nail how the church absolutely needs to take this opportunity to show the answer to society on how things can be, needs to be that city on a hill that Jesus called us to be, so that it can serve as a beacon in every local community of the way that things should be, the way that we should be providing for one another, the way that we should be giving generously, and in the same sense, having a sort of security contract, almost an unspoken contract of reciprocity that I can give radically, because if radical crazy things happen in my life that are negative, I can depend on the church's subsequent radical provision for me, right? So let's get into this video, and I'll pause intermittently to talk about different points and how I think the church would be better off responding to them.
2024. The U.S. economy continues to show no signs of stopping. Housing prices hit all-time highs. The S&P 500 hits an all-time high, and the combined net worth of all Americans crossed $150 trillion. But while the US has been booming for decades, one group has been left behind: young people. Older Americans saw their share of wealth increase by 12% since 1989, while those under 40 saw a decline of nearly 50%. And now, for the first time in 200 years, 30-year-olds are poorer than their parents.
The social contract that is now no longer in place, and for the first time in the U.S.'s history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were.
What went wrong?
I just want to point out that we don't see this only in finance. We see the centralization of power and resource in our politics. We see this centralization of power and resource in local churches, with a lot of times a lack of empowerment and embracing of younger generations, sure, in ministry, but actually giving them a seat at the table, no way. We see this in our nonprofits in the U.S. All around, we see a disenfranchisement and kind of exclusionary, what's the term, like putting aside of young people, and it is not okay. It has no place in the church. Look at Paul's letter to Timothy. That is not what the case should be in the church. The case should be one of empowerment, one of participation and embrace of the next generation, and one of discipleship and pulling them into the work of the church and giving them meaningful participation in its work and meaningful provision, right? And so this is a damning fact, not only for the U.S. But for our church as well, in that the church looks like this instead of looking countercultural and looking different than this. But let's continue on this point.
This is America, the broken generation. The United States, the land of opportunity. From the beginning, America was different. Unlike the rest of the world, it didn't matter who you were or where you came from. Everyone had a shot at the American dream. However, the reality on the ground today is bleak, and the dream is more like a nightmare. In 1985, the average home was 4.5 times the median household income. Today, this number has ballooned by 50% to 7 times. In a matter of 40 years, life has become 2 times as expensive. One of the main drivers for this affordability crisis is underdevelopment.
It's called NIMBY, not in my backyard. City planners say the attitude is spreading and causing widespread social disruption.
Across many major U.S. cities, landowners have fought against new developments to preserve their quality of life and to ensure their property values stay high. Specifically, housing starts as a proportion of the U.S. population have dropped by 30% compared to before 2000. This means that as the population continues to grow, the number of homes per person is declining, driving up real estate prices. This reduced housing development has compounded over the years and has created a major shortage of housing. Take a look at San Francisco. In 2024, the city only approved 16 housing permits, and 7 of those were for single-family homes. This is a city of 1 million people, and the surrounding metro area has 7 million people, and all they approved was 16 housing permits. At the same time, the share of homes owned by older generations has grown significantly compared to the past. The proportion of homes owned by Americans over 55 has increased by 23%, while home ownership among those under 55 fell 19%. Older generations have gobbled up real estate like candy, and they have created a system that benefits them meaningfully. Lower taxes on capital gains, the ability to forego taxes through a 1031 exchange, and much, much more. These homeowners are staying in their homes longer than ever. 54% of them own their homes outright. The rest have locked in historically low interest rates. And to make matters worse, HELOCs allow these homeowners to tap into their home equity without having to sell. The result? They have no incentive to sell. This, in addition to low development, has kept the housing market artificially tight. Empty nesters are living in large homes that are mostly unused, while young people struggle to get by. Concurrently, a new player has entered the housing market: private equity.
Before he gets into this, I just want to talk about, sorry, one moment. Like, if you are someone who is over the age of 40, listen to young people when, like, hear out that, I mean, the reality is they have it harder than you do on average. Now, you as an individual may not, but your generation over 40 had a healthier economy and had better economic opportunity than young people do today. That stat about house prices before being 4.4 times the median income, now 7 times, like, that's just a fact. That's just reality, right? And so the thing that the church has to understand about this, when you talk about giving and generosity, I hear so much kind of damnation of young people. I'm like, why aren't you tithing? Why aren't you giving like we did when we were your age? And just all these different things. And it's like, look, you have to appreciate that they have a harder reality than you had in your time. I say this as a 31-year-old myself. Like, I see it. I'm provided for economically, right? I'm not in a bad spot, but I see it among my peers. A lot of these challenges that previous generations didn't face at the same scale, right? And so it's critical to recognize those things and to respond accordingly to, as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, that the goal of financial participation in the church is not just generosity and generous hearts, but it's fairness. So Paul himself in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 talks about the purpose of giving is so that there will be fairness, that those who have much would give much. Those who have little, it's okay for them to give little. Not give at all. 1 Corinthians 16:1 is very clear. Put aside something on the first day of every week. Something should be coming from everyone. But the church today expects far more of the poor, and oftentimes the younger people, than it does proportionally of the rich, who are oftentimes older. And that has to change, especially if we want to be taken seriously by these young people who see right through that fact that, hey, this guy, he's driving a, Lexus or whatever to church, and I'm driving my old beater that's falling apart all the time, but I'm being expected to give proportionally just as much as him. What's up with that? We've got to do better on that front.
In business school, there was nothing sexier in this entire world than private equity. It's exactly where you went if you wanted to one day own an island. And one of my classmates just bought an island.
Private equity currently owns 240,000 single-family homes in the United States. Now, this is only 5% of the overall single-family home rental market, which is small, but the ownership is concentrated in the Sun Belt, and this doesn't include ownership in apartments, which have a much, much higher corporate and private equity ownership rate. Analysts have shown that select Sun Belt markets have over 50% ownership by private investment firms. By concentrating their ownership in key markets, they are able to drive down property management and service costs while having an outsized role in dictating market rents. For example, between 2020 and 2023, rents for a 2-bedroom detached home rose by about 44% in Tampa, 43% in Phoenix, and 35% in Atlanta. Compare this to the national average of 24%. The average home buyer can't compete against private equity. These firms are able to buy large swaths of home in one go and make unconditional offers with cash. Furthermore, unlike mom-and-pop landlords, corporate landlords are highly sophisticated and will do everything to generate additional yield, even breaking the law. Recently, the Attorney General of Washington, D.C. filed a case against 14 corporate landlords for price fixing through the analytics company RealPage. RealPage helped landlords optimize rents across 4.5 million units in the United States. And here's the shocker. RealPage is owned by private equity firm Thoma Bravo. By taking data from millions of units, RealPage is able to optimize pricing. And as you can see, the value of data to these corporations is in the billions. When researching these videos, we review and sign up for multiple news sources. Because of this, we are spammed with emails and promotions from sites we've never heard of. That's why we're proud to partner with today's video sponsor, Obvious, to own as many homes as being spammed. And now, back to the video. The endgame for corporate ownership of homes is very obvious: to own as many homes as humanly possible and to create forever renters out of would-be homebuyers. And it seems like they are well on their way of achieving their goal. It's projected that private equity will own 40% of US single-family home rentals by 2030. 8 times their current ownership. This will likely increase the rent paid by renters, making it more challenging for them to save up and buy a home, while at the same time reducing the housing stock available to be bought, driving up prices further. Historically, housing has been a big wealth store, but with limited supply created by older generations and increasing competition for private equity, wealth is declining among younger generations. Since 1989, wealth held by those under 40 has declined by nearly 50%, while wealth held by boomers has increased. There are a few common explanations older generations give for this. The first is that young people don't work hard enough, or they're lazy. And this is somewhat true. In 1985, the average work week was 35 hours. Today, it's around 34 hours, making us 3% lazier. Now, you don't need a PhD to see that this is not the issue. The second point raised is that young people spend money unnecessarily. And although young people spend more money on experiences and technology, they actually spend less on physical goods, balancing out most increases in spending. The primary contributor to higher spending with young people is the increased relative value of housing, healthcare, and education. In fact, if you remove housing from the equation, younger generations spend less on average. And contrary to popular belief, Gen Z and millennials are saving more of their earnings than older generations. Lastly, people will claim that young people are unskilled and need more education. But this is absolutely unfair. Every subsequent generation has become more educated than the last, and Gen Z will continue this trend and become even more educated than millennials. This, though, is expected because society has pushed down the narrative that college is necessary to progress in life. This would be fine and dandy if there was a value to education, but sadly, college is more expensive and less beneficial than ever. In 1980, the cost of attending a 4-year college program when adjusted for inflation was $10,000. Today, it's nearly $29,000. That's a 3x increase. But why? One simple word: bloat. From 1976 to 2018, US college enrollment grew by 78%, but at the same time, full-time faculty grew by 92%. Okay, that doesn't seem too bad. But administration? Administration grew by 164%, and other non-administrative professionals 452%. That means that the professional staff at universities has far outpaced the growth of students. Colleges are spending more and more money on things other than education. More admin staff, more consultants, more fancy buildings, more of anything but education. To make matters worse, even if you get an education, it doesn't really solve anything. In 1980, households with a 4-year college education earned $100,000 per year. Today, they earn $118,000 per year. This is a real increase of 18%, which seems good on the surface. However, during the same period of time, the cost of a 4-year education has increased from $40,000 to $115,000, a real increase of 188%. So here's the marketing pitch for college. You can increase your earnings by 18% by spending 190% more than previous. Unlike in the past, college...
And you might say like, well, that evens out over time. But the problem is, yes, while your earnings are perpetual and that college fee is one time, it's not one time, because most of the time it's financed by student loans, which typically have horrific interest rates as high as 7.5% or higher, which means that if you're paying that interest, like just paying the interest down alone, is going to be about half of that increased earnings. And that's lifetime. That's like not coming out of school earnings. That's lifetime earnings, right? So that's an average of lifetime earnings. So that the math doesn't math.
College is no longer a path to economic prosperity. Instead, young people are forced into a perpetual education and credential machine. What once required a bachelor's degree and entry-level experience now requires a master's degree and 300 years of experience. The cherry on top, it will cost you everything. Given how expensive education is, most students have to take out large student loans. Currently, the total balance of student debt in the United States is $1.7 trillion. This number has grown 2 times faster than wages over the last 20 years. But this isn't limited to student loans. With rising living costs and stagnating wages, the only way to make ends meet for young people is accumulating more and more debt. Since 2013, credit card debt has increased 26%, auto debt 14%, and mortgage debt 44%. This increase...
Let's remember what was said about young people oftentimes spending less when you account for the differences in housing prices.
Is happening while young people are earning 13% less than they did in 2013. But this isn't the only debt that young people need to worry about. While personal consumer debt has been rising and young people are more indebted than ever, the United States of America has gone on a debt binge unlike anything the world has ever seen. Fiscal responsibility has become a forgotten concept in the United States. Since the removal of the gold standard, politicians have discovered that there is no consequence to printing endless amounts of money. And over the last 60 years, government debt has grown 3 times faster than GDP and now sits at $35 trillion versus GDP of $27 trillion. The only time debt was this high in US history was World War II, the bloodiest, most destructive conflict in human history. This debt is obviously not free and has associated interest costs. Currently, the US is spending 16% of their annual budget on interest, or $624 billion. That's enough money to pay off all student debt in 3 years. Sadly, there's literally no mechanism to stop the government from spending money it does not have. Elected officials are not required to balance budgets. They cannot be fired for overspending, They aren't measured on returns on invested capital. All they need to do is spend the money and campaign for votes. Now, $35 trillion sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But what if I told you that the real debt number is much, much higher? Let me break it down. National debt is $34.6 trillion. State-level debt adds $1.9 trillion to the mix. Unfunded OPEB liabilities are another $1 trillion. Unfunded pension liabilities, $7 trillion. And the biggest, baddest of them all, Social Security and Medicare contribute to a whopping $80 trillion of additional liabilities. Therefore, the total actual debt held by the United States government stands at a staggering $123,875,533,000,000. That is 5 times greater than the US GDP.
I will say, if you're going to talk about that, you should talk about basically uncounted assets or future revenues that would offset a significant portion of that Medicare and Social Security liability. But it's a valid point ultimately.
Put another way, $370,000 per American. But in reality, if you're over 50, you probably won't have to worry about this debt. Most of this debt won't impact you. The lives of older generations will be fine. Instead, this spending will benefit old people and levy a tax on the future of young people. So, if we exclude those over 50, the tax amounts to over $600,000 a person. To make matters worse, the high cost of living is leading young people to have fewer children. Without a sharp increase in immigration, this will likely reduce production and worsen the debt burden. But why and how would the government spend so much money knowing it's nearly impossible to ever pay it back? Do they not care about young people and their future?
Because short-term spending gets you short-term elections, which is all you need. If you're someone in office, you only got to get elected this election. Who cares what happens in 20 years, right? Oop.
Answer: they don't. The founding fathers of the United States are often revered as godlike figures. They are thought of as distinguished and experienced individuals who sought out to create the framework for the greatest nation the world has ever seen. Surely, these men must have been wise and old. Let's see. James Monroe, 18. Aaron Burr, 20. Alexander Hamilton, 21. James Madison, 25. Thomas Jefferson, 33. John Adams, 40. And George Washington, a distinguished 44. If you include everyone who signed the Declaration of Independence, the average age was 44. Now, let's take a look at Congress today. The average age? 58. What about the Senate? 64. But what's the median age in the United States? 38. How can people nearly twice the age of the average American truly understand the challenges they face? They can't. How are elected officials near the end of their life supposed to behave fiscally responsible when their decisions won't burden them? They won't.
There's a good note, a critical note for the church to pull from this that I'll speak to in just a moment.
McConnell took office in 1985 and is currently 82 years old. He can barely communicate, yet he decides your future. Joe Biden is 81 years old and was elected to office in 1970 before any millennials were even born. Today, he is proposing major spending bills that he will never see to completion. John McCain, Elijah Cummings, and Dianne Feinstein all died while in office. These were people who were voting on the future of the United States, but would never see it. How is this okay? Young people are seeing rising costs of living and stagnating wages across the country. Wealth is continually growing with older generations while young people get poorer and poorer. Education continues to increase in price while becoming less valuable in the market. Consumer debt is rising rapidly, burdening young people more than ever. The US continues to spend money like it grows on trees, handing out benefits to the old while taxing the young. And all of this happens while young people are split between red and blue. Wake up. The solution isn't Democrat or Republican. We have seen both parties come in and out over the decades, and your lives have continued to get worse. They took away your dream of starting a family, and you said nothing. They took away the chance to own a home, and you said nothing. They spend on programs for the old and tell you to work forever, and you said nothing. And now, as you are tied up for a lifetime of servitude, Will you let them drain you of every last bit of your future? Or will you stand up and say, enough is enough? Take your future into your own hands. Subscribe to 2 and
Okay, so the solution, this being a secular video, obviously the solution is going to be secular. Here's the thing. I think there's a huge opportunity for the church to set the standard for what it looks like for intergenerational engagement and intergenerational futures to be created. I think right now, everything that he said about like the average age of leadership in Congress and the differing or diverging broadly from the average age of Americans, that applies to the church too. Like the average age of those in leadership in the church diverges broadly from the average age of those in the church. And I'm not saying that you need to have your church run by those 30-somethings or 20-somethings. Support church plants by young people only. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's a lot for us to learn from the wisdom of our older peers. Excuse me. What I am saying is older generation, it is so critical that you give young people a seat at the table, that you invite them to participate, that you hear them advocate for their peers and for their generation, so that you actually understand the challenges that they're facing and can enable and allow them to contribute to the church, to the future of the church. So much today, young people have been relegated to the sidelines as spectators only in our churches, while the real decision making and the real information available to those making the decisions is within this kind of boomer bubble. And that's just not going to that's not going to create a sustainable future for the church. That said, the other piece of this puzzle is that financial participation in the church has to be that participation centric, not contributor centric. It needs to be a two-way street. It needs to be understood that it's a two-way street. It needs to rely more on more proportionally from the rich, not proportionally that you get 10% from the rich, 10% of the poor. That's not what we see in the Bible. That's not what we see in the Bible. In the Old Testament, if you didn't own land, you weren't tithing. Only those who owned land for livestock or for crops were tithing. Laborers, there's nothing in the entirety of the Old Testament about laborers tithing. They could give offerings, yes, but the same expectations were not laid on them as were for those who were wealthy, for tithing and gleaning, the two primary methods of giving in Old Testament Israelite society. In the New Testament, tithing is never once mentioned. Free will offerings are. Paul says that those who are wealthier should give more, that they may be equality. Look it up, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. The church has embraced this tithing theology because it kind of lets the rich off scot-free and burdens the poor in a way that is disproportionate and unfair. And it's frankly fairly harmful because if you're tithing 10%, good job, you're holy. But if you're not, you must be doing something wrong. You're immoral. Where the person who makes $1 million a year tithing 10%, sure, they gave them $100,000 and they had $900,000 to live on. Like, how are they more moral than the single mother who makes $40,000 a year trying to support her 2 young children and who gives $1,000 a year? That $1,000 to her is much more kind of proportionally in terms of her needs than that $100,000 is to that person who makes $1 million a year. It is time for the church to have a renewed and more scriptural understanding of what is demanded of our congregants in generosity, so that we can properly model for society what biblical generosity, what God's economy is, right? Anyways, not a whole lot more to say. I think that the church can lead the way on this, can lead the way on showing an economic future, but not just economic. I think economics, the fact that young people in the U.S. and in much of the West have been robbed of a future in some sense is something that is not, it reflects economically, but it's not based on economics. It's based on this individualistic kind of me and mine centric lifestyle in which, like he talked about at the beginning, NIMBY, like, hey, not in my backyard, build those homes somewhere else, that sure, we flourish, my home values go up, my schools remain better quality, my, you know, different good stuff happens for me, but at the cost of society as a whole, especially those who do not yet have, who typically skew younger. And the way then for a proper economic future to be created, especially if we maintain capitalism, which I think we should, because I think that's the better solution, is for people to just be less selfish and be more communally oriented, and to understand the challenges and needs of generations and subsets of the economy and people and population beyond their own, and to care about those things. And so anyways, that can start in the church and the model that we set, and hopefully, as all moral things pretty much in the West have gone, then flow into the economy, into the secular economy, into secular society from the church and from the church's example. That is how we as the church can shape the morality of society that we desire to see. So I hope this was interesting for you guys. Thank you to everyone who joined, and subscribe if you haven't. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, because we talk about nerdy Christian stuff all the time here. The goal of this channel is to help you to be more informed, to grow in discipleship, and to be generally more discerning, wise person. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.